If you travel to the edge of the town of Henley-on-Thames and follow the road up a sloping hill called Gravel Hill, you'll eventually reach a pair of tall iron gates. From the outside, it looks like the entrance to just another old English estate. But behind those gates, hidden from casual passersby, sits one of the most unusual properties in all of England. This place is called Friar Park. From the road, Friar Park seems simple enough. You can see a large Victorian house with red brick walls, pointed roofs, and tall Gothic-style towers. Its sharp pinnacles and decorative stonework suggest that rich people once lived there. To someone driving past, it might look like a respectable but ordinary country house, the kind wealthy families owned in the 1800s. But that first glance is a trick. The real magic of Friar Park is not just the mansion itself, but what stretches out behind it. There, spread across roughly 30 acres, is a garden unlike almost anything else in Britain. It is not just a lawn and a few flower beds. It is a complete fantasy world built out of plants, rocks, water, and stone. Hidden beneath the ground, there is an underground lake where visitors could once row boats through darkness, guided only by strange lights and echoes. On one hillside stands a man-made mountain, about 20 feet tall, built to copy the famous Matterhorn in the Swiss Alps, using tons of stone brought from Yorkshire. In the rocky slopes and tunnels, caves twist and turn, some filled with glowing glass berries, others with illusions that trick the eye and confuse your sense of distance. In another corner of the estate, there is a Japanese garden carefully copied from a design printed in a book from 1893. Elsewhere, there are herb gardens laid out to match the way medieval people planted them in the 1400s, based on old paintings and manuscripts. Even the pathways and beds are arranged to mirror history, almost like walking through a living textbook. And then there are the tricks. Across a lake, flat stones are set so cleverly that, when you watch from far away, it looks as if people are walking directly on the surface of the water. At first, your brain refuses to believe what your eyes see. But at Friar Park, that is exactly the point. Nothing is meant to be completely normal. This is not a typical English country estate filled with only neat lawns, polite flower beds, and stiff statues. Instead, the whole place is like a giant puzzle. Every corner hides some kind of joke, surprise, or secret. All of this came from the mind of one man, an eccentric Victorian lawyer named Sir Frank Crisp. Between 1889 and 1895, Sir Frank Crisp bought land, tore down old houses, and built both the mansion and the gardens that turned Friar Park into his own private wonderland. He did not see it as just a home. He called it his Museum of Gardens, a place where nature, history, science, and humor all mixed together. Sir Frank Crisp spent a fortune on this dream. He hired 45 gardeners to look after the grounds full-time. He loved jokes and wordplay, so he filled the estate with visual puns and strange decorations. There were stone and terracotta friars hidden everywhere, many of them holding metal frying pans as a silly pun on friar and friar. In dark caves, he placed garden gnomes in little scenes, so that visitors would suddenly discover them staring back from the shadows. He even ordered signs with confusing messages. One famous carving read, "Don't keep off the grass." At first glance, it looks like a classic keep off the grass warning, but that extra word "don't" makes your brain stall. Are you allowed on the grass or not? This is exactly the kind of joke Sir Frank Crisp enjoyed, something simple that forced visitors to stop and think. All across the estate, he had mottos, phrases, and riddles carved into stone, wood, and floors. Some were in Latin, some in English, some serious, some funny. Step by step, as you walked through the grounds, you weren't just seeing gardens. You were actually walking through Sir Frank's sense of humor and his mind. For a while, Friar Park was famous among people who loved plants and unusual estates. But time is not always kind, even to magical places. When Sir Frank Crisp died in 1919, Friar Park passed to other owners. None of them had his exact mix of money, energy, and obsession. Slowly, over the decades, the gardens began to suffer. The alpine plants were harder to maintain. The underground systems needed constant attention. The jokes and inscriptions remained, but the careful planting and detailed structure started to fade. By the late 1960s, the estate was in serious trouble. The once beautiful rock gardens had become overgrown. Many of the finely planned areas were choked with trees and brambles. Some of the caves were no longer safe to enter. The great mansion itself was not being used by a rich family anymore. Instead, it was occupied by nuns who ran a convent school inside the house. They used the building, but they did not have the money or the manpower to care for the wild and complicated gardens that Sir Frank Crisp had created. At that point, many people thought Friar Park was doomed. The cost of repairing such an elaborate estate was enormous. In those years, lots of old houses in Britain were being torn down because it was cheaper to demolish them than to restore them. It seemed very likely that Friar Park would be next. Then, in January 1970, everything changed. A 27-year-old musician, a former Beatle named George Harrison, learned that this strange, half-forgotten property was for sale. While the other Beatles were drifting apart and their world was shifting, George Harrison was looking for a place of his own, somewhere private where he could live, work, and create music away from the noise of fame. He bought Friar Park for $140,000, a large amount at the time, but still a bargain for such a huge estate. When George Harrison moved in, the gardens were overgrown, and many of Sir Frank's features were hidden under weeds and trees. But where others saw a ruin, George saw potential and a kindred spirit. Over the next years, George Harrison spent time and money restoring what Sir Frank Crisp had made. He cleared paths, reopened views, and brought parts of the gardens back to life. He added his own touches too. Inside the mansion, he built a modern recording studio. In that studio, some of the most important albums of the 1970s were recorded. Not just his own music, but also projects he produced for other artists. The words that Sir Frank Crisp had carved into fireplaces, floors, and walls did not go unnoticed. George Harrison read them, thought about them, and even turned some of them into song lyrics. In a way, the Victorian lawyer and the rock musician became partners across time, one building in stone, the other answering in sound. George Harrison once said that Friar Park was as much about Sir Frank Crisp as it was about me. He did not see himself as the owner in the usual sense. Instead, he viewed himself as a caretaker, someone looking after a rare and eccentric treasure that deserved to survive beyond any one person's lifetime. So, this is the story we are exploring, the story of Friar Park. It is the tale of how a lawyer's weekend retreat turned into a fantasy landscape, how that landscape nearly vanished, and how a Beatle helped save it. It stretches from Victorian eccentricity to rock and roll history, from the largest rock garden in England to a recording studio that could compete with Abbey Road. If you enjoy learning about historic estates, unique gardens, and the unusual people who created and protected them, make sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel, to the man whose imagination started it all, the eccentric lawyer who decided to build a fantasy world in the Oxfordshire countryside. To understand how Friar Park became one of the most unusual estates in England, we have to begin with the man who imagined it in the first place, Sir Frank Crisp. Before he built artificial mountains, underground lakes, and gardens shaped by history, he was simply a clever young man trying to find his place in Victorian society. Frank Crisp was born in London on October 25, 1843. His childhood was not easy. His mother passed away when he was still young, leaving him without the comfort and care most children depend on. After her death, he was raised by his grandfather, John Philby Childs, a man who believed in discipline, learning, and the importance of hard work. Growing up in that strict household helped shape Frank into someone who took his studies very seriously. As a boy, Frank showed an early interest in books and learning. He attended the University of London, where he earned degrees in both arts and law. He was a strong student, always curious, often spending long hours reading and studying on his own. His professors saw talent in him. They noticed that he wasn't just smart, he was persistent, detail-oriented, and very good at understanding complicated topics. In 1869, when he was 26, Frank Crisp officially qualified as a solicitor. Almost immediately, he proved how skilled he was. Within only a few years, he became a partner at a major London law firm called Ashurst, Morris and Crisp, located on Throgmorton Avenue. The firm still exists today, more than a century later. Victorian London was booming during these years. New inventions were appearing everywhere. electric lights, telephones, new engines, new machines, and business was expanding across the world. It was the perfect time for a bright young lawyer to rise. Frank Crisp handled some of the most important contracts of that era. He wrote legal agreements for the construction of battleships for the Japanese Navy. He worked on the famous Cullinan diamonds, some of the biggest diamonds ever discovered, and he helped with the formation of the Anglo-Persian Oil Company, which would later become British Petroleum, one of the largest oil companies in the world. Because his firm worked so closely with new technologies, Frank had inside knowledge. He understood early which inventions would succeed. He also invested in them. This helped grow his wealth even more. Some sources say he earned as much as 55% of his firm's profits, a massive amount of money at the time. With his growing fortune, Frank bought a large family home in Holland Park, a wealthy neighborhood in London. The house was called Clyde House. It was big enough for himself, his wife Catherine, their 2 daughters, their 4 sons, and a staff of servants who kept the household running smoothly. Clyde House was grand and comfortable, but it didn't satisfy everything Frank wanted. Like many wealthy Victorian gentlemen, Sir Frank Crisp dreamed of having a country estate, someplace peaceful and far away from the noise and crowds of London. He wanted land where his children could run freely, where guests could visit on weekends, and where he could study the things he loved. Because Frank had many passions, his love for plants and science, Sir Frank Crisp had a deep fascination with plants, nature, and the history of gardening. He joined the Linnaean Society, a respected organization focused on natural history, evolution, and plant studies. Eventually, he became both treasurer and vice president of the society. This wasn't just a hobby for him. He took it seriously. Frank especially loved alpine plants that grew high in the mountains, medieval gardening methods from centuries ago, Japanese garden design, historical landscaping, scientific experimentation with plants. These interests played a huge role later when he built Friar Park, but his scientific interests did not end with plants. Frank was also an amateur expert in microscopy, the study of tiny objects using microscopes. He joined the Royal Microscopical Society, donated equipment to them, and published technical papers explaining what he learned. When he became passionate about something, he didn't just enjoy it casually. He studied it deeply. His love for humor and puzzles. For all his success and intelligence, Sir Frank Crisp was not a stiff, humorless lawyer. In fact, he had a playful personality. He adored jokes, puns, wordplay, optical illusions, surprising and confusing people. This mix of intelligence and mischief is exactly why Friar Park became so unusual. Almost everything he built came from both his clever mind and his love of fun. Searching for land. By the mid-1880s, Frank began searching for land outside London. He wanted enough space to build gardens bigger than anything in the city. He needed hills, slopes, open ground, and room for experiments. He wanted to create something unique, something that no one else had ever attempted. He eventually chose the outskirts of Henley-on-Thames, a beautiful town already known for its annual rowing regatta, a major event that attracted visitors from across England. By the 1880s, Henley had become a desirable area filled with large estates owned by wealthy families. The countryside was lovely, with gently rolling hills, river views, and clean, fresh air. This was exactly what Sir Frank Crisp was looking for. In 1889, he began buying land on the western edge of Henley. The property he purchased was actually 2 smaller estates, one called Friar's Field, and the other called Friar Park. Each estate had its own house and driveway, but neither house met Frank's expectations. He didn't want to renovate someone else's design. He wanted to build something entirely his own. So, he ordered both houses torn down. He kept the name Friar Park for the whole property, even though the word friar had no religious connection to the people who originally owned it. But Frank liked the sound of the name, and it gave him the perfect excuse to decorate his future estate with funny friar statues, carvings, and puns. Between the 2 properties, he had around 30 acres, enough for the ambitious project forming in his imagination. Planning the estate. Sir Frank Crisp hired one of the best landscape designers of the Victorian era, Henry Ernest Milner, to help shape the grounds. Milner understood large-scale gardens, long driveways, and dramatic approaches. He knew how to turn slopes, hills, and valleys into beautiful scenes that changed as visitors walked through them. But Frank didn't want a regular estate. He wanted medieval gardens based on 15th century manuscripts, Japanese gardens based on real Japanese designs, alpine rock gardens with plants from high mountain regions, water features that created illusions, underground caves full of surprises, sculptures and inscriptions hidden everywhere. So, while Milner handled the technical design, Frank Crisp remained deeply involved in every detail. He made sure every garden theme was historically accurate. He personally chose many of the plants and rocks. He approved every carving, every pathway, and every joke hidden in stone. For Frank, this wasn't just landscaping, it was storytelling. It was art. It was a living museum. By 1900, Sir Frank Crisp had spent what today would be the equivalent of $20 million on building his dream estate. And he wasn't finished yet. He was just getting started. Building a fantasy estate. By the late 1880s, Sir Frank Crisp had the land he wanted, the ideas he loved, and the resources to bring his imagination to life. Now, it was time to build the actual estate, a place that would combine everything he cared about: history, science, gardening, humor, and surprise. To begin, he needed a strong framework. That meant designing the roads, shaping the land, and building the structures that would anchor the whole property. The first major decision he made was to keep the name Friar Park for the entire estate. Even though the name originally came from the previous owner's family, it happened to fit perfectly with the playful world Frank wanted to create. Since a friar is a kind of monk, he immediately turned that into a running theme. Even before the gardens were finished, he had already chosen to fill the property with carved friars, painted friars, stone friars, and funny friars holding frying pans. The entire place would revolve around this humorous identity. As soon as the two older houses were demolished, Frank brought in Henry Ernest Milner, one of the most respected landscape designers of the Victorian era. Milner was known for carefully planned estates with grand entrances, long paths, dramatic reveals, and natural-looking plantings. But Friar Park was not like the usual landscape projects Milner worked on. Most clients asked him to create simple, attractive gardens. Frank asked him to build an entire world. Before anything else, Milner focused on shaping the land. The estate sloped downward from west to east, which gave Frank an exciting opportunity. From the high western end, you could see across the whole valley and over the town of Henley. The natural shape of the land meant that the house could sit like a lookout, watching over everything below. Milner designed a long, winding driveway, almost a quarter-mile in length, that started at the main gate and slowly curved up toward the house. This driveway wasn't meant to be straightforward. It was meant to tease visitors, to show them small glimpses of gardens and water features, while hiding the biggest surprises until the right moment. When guests arrived at Friar Park, they would never see everything at once. They would see small hints around each bend. Only after passing through shifting scenery would the mansion finally appear at the top of the rise. While Milner handled the overall shape of the land, Sir Frank Crisp focused on the details of the themed gardens. He spent countless hours studying rare books and old illustrations, so he could recreate gardens exactly as they appeared centuries earlier. If he read about a medieval herb garden in a manuscript from the 1400s, he wanted one just like it. If he saw a Japanese landscape plan in a newly published study from Tokyo, he wanted to match it perfectly. His goal was not simply to make something pretty. He wanted each garden to be historically correct. Frank began planning which styles he wanted and where each section should go. One part of the estate would become a medieval garden, carefully arranged with raised beds and ancient plants once used for food and medicine. Another part would become an Elizabethan garden, inspired by the early years of the English Renaissance. Then, in a completely different area, he would build a Japanese garden with its own water features, bridge, and carefully placed stones. But one of Frank's biggest dreams was something no other estate in England had ever attempted: a massive alpine rock garden that rose almost like a mountain. Victorian gardeners loved rock gardens, but none of them imagined building one on this scale. Frank wanted cliffs, slopes, crevices, and planting pockets for rare mountain plants. He imagined visitors walking through an environment that felt like the Alps, even though they were just a few miles from the River Thames. Milner helped him mark the spot on the northwest slope of the property. The steep ground there would allow Frank to create an impressive artificial mountain, complete with a miniature version of the Matterhorn at its peak. This garden alone would take years to finish, with thousands of stones hauled in by cart and thousands of alpine plants arranged with scientific care. But before any of the major landscaping could happen, Frank needed buildings that matched his vision. He hired an architect named Robert Clark Edwards, a man who was not famous but was clever enough to work with Frank's unusual ideas. Edwards specialized in Gothic-style buildings, which suited Frank perfectly. Frank wanted a mansion with towers, gables, pointed arches, carved stone, and a fantasy-like silhouette, something dramatic and whimsical at the same time. For Frank, the house wasn't just a place to live. It was the stage for his entire world. He chose what architects call flamboyant Gothic, a style filled with curves, stone patterns, decorations, and shapes that draw your eyes in every direction. He wanted a house that looked impressive from far away and interesting up close. Edwards helped turn Frank's designs into real architectural plans and made sure the structure would be solid and safe. But Frank remained the creative director. Nearly every detail was his. Before the mansion could be started, Frank built 3 gate lodges, one at the main entrance, one farther down the southern border, and one near the back of the estate. These lodges weren't simple cottages. They were highly decorated buildings with steep roofs, fancy brickwork, tall chimneys, carved stone, and Gothic windows. Many visitors later mistook the largest gate lodge for the main house because it was so impressive. The head gardener, Philip Knowles, lived in the lower lodge. His job was essential. He managed the 45 gardeners who worked full-time to maintain Frank's growing masterpiece. Even early in the project, Frank understood that his estate would require an enormous staff. Every garden, from alpine plants to Japanese trees to antique roses, needed experts who understood the right techniques for each style. While the lodges were being finished, Frank oversaw the creation of giant gates for the property. These gates were anything but ordinary. They were topped with carved heads, animals, mythical creatures, and, of course, friars. Dragons, angels, horses, devils. Every kind of carving stood guard over the entrance. Some had silly expressions, others looked fierce or strange. Together, they set the tone for everything inside. Even the sign by the gate contained a joke. "Don't keep off the grass." This confusing message made many visitors stop and scratch their heads. Frank loved watching people argue about whether the sign meant they should stay off the grass or walk on it boldly. The confusion was the point. With the lodges complete and the entrance finished, the mansion itself began to rise. Red brick, bright terracotta decorations, and pale stone trim gave the building rich color. The towers and gables reached upward like something from a fairy tale. The roof lines were complicated and full of detail. Dozens of tall chimneys rose into the sky. Even the chimneys were decorated with twists, patterns, and colorful bricks. Inside, the mansion was just as elaborate. There were carved oak staircases, marble floors, stained glass windows, giant fireplaces, and ceilings painted like summer skies. Every room had something surprising, a carving, a joke, or a message hidden in plain sight. Even the light switches were unusual. Instead of ordinary levers, the switches were shaped like the noses of little friar faces. To turn on a light, guests had to poke a friar in the nose. This made people laugh every time, which was exactly what Sir Frank Crisp wanted. By 1895, the mansion was finished, and the estate finally had its architectural heart. But the gardens, the real soul of Friar Park, were still only beginning. The Alpine Mountain, the underground caves, the lakes and stepping stones, the medieval and Japanese gardens, and the countless hidden surprises would take another 20 years to complete. And Sir Frank Crisp was ready for all of it. The gardens become a magical world. With the mansion completed and the entrance lodges standing proudly at the borders of the estate, Sir Frank Crisp was finally ready to begin the part of Friar Park that mattered most to him: the gardens. To him, the gardens were not just extra decoration or pleasant scenery. They were the entire heart of his vision, a living invention that mixed history, humor, art, science, and imagination, all in one place. If the house was the stage, the gardens were the performance. Before any grand ideas could be built, the land had to be shaped. Workers spent months digging, leveling, draining, redirecting water, and preparing the soil. Because the estate sat on sloping ground, the direction of the slopes had to be carefully controlled to create the right effects. Some parts needed to feel soft and natural, like a peaceful English meadow. Others needed sharp edges, sudden drops, twisting paths, or steep hills to match the alpine designs Frank wanted. One thing became clear very early. Maintaining all of this would require a huge staff. Even while construction was still going on, Frank had already hired gardeners, plant specialists, stoneworkers, and craftsmen. The head gardener, Philip Knowles, managed everything with strict discipline. A team of more than 40 gardeners worked day after day planting, trimming, building, digging, and carrying out Frank's instructions. They weren't just maintaining flowers, they were helping create an entire landscape that blended different cultures and historical eras. The medieval gardens. One of the first themed areas Frank worked on was the medieval garden. He loved history and had spent many nights studying old illustrations and manuscripts from the 1400s. Medieval gardens were not just beautiful, they were practical. They were used to grow herbs for cooking, plants for medicine, and flowers for dyes and perfumes. Their designs often included raised beds, wooden borders, neatly trimmed edges, and walkways arranged in geometric patterns. Frank wanted his medieval garden to look exactly like the ones in the illustrations he studied. He recreated the layout carefully, choosing plants that had been used hundreds of years ago. There were sage, thyme, rosemary, lavender, medicinal herbs, and fruit trees trimmed into shapes common in the Middle Ages. Each plant was carefully placed, not only for beauty, but also for historical accuracy. When guests walked through this garden, he wanted them to feel like they had stepped backward in time. The Japanese garden. On another part of the property, Frank built a complete Japanese garden. During the late 1800s, Japanese design had become popular in Europe, especially after Japan opened to international trade. Frank studied Japanese gardening very seriously, using an 1893 publication as his main guide. The Japanese garden included pools of clear water, curved bridges, carefully placed stones, trimmed shrubs, and lantern-style features. But unlike most English interpretations of Japanese gardens, Frank tried to follow the old rules as closely as possible. The placement of rocks, for example, had to be precise. Japanese design often used stones to symbolize mountains, islands, or spiritual ideas. Frank and his workers moved large stones around repeatedly until the positions felt balanced. Nothing was random. Every stone, every shrub, every ripple in the water had purpose. The Alpine Mountain. But the greatest and most ambitious part of the gardens was the Alpine Rock Garden. This was the area that allowed Frank to express his imagination with the most freedom. He didn't just want a few rocks with plants on them. He wanted a miniature mountain landscape built from thousands of pieces of Yorkshire stone. At the top of the slope, he planned a 20-foot replica of the Matterhorn, giving visitors the illusion of standing in a high mountain environment. Constructing the Alpine Garden was a massive challenge. Each stone had to be hauled up the slope and placed in the exact right position. Some stones were enormous, weighing hundreds of pounds. Others were small enough to tuck into crevices. The workers built cliffs, slopes, ledges, and passageways. They created small valleys where rare alpine plants could grow, mimicking the environments where those plants would live naturally. Many of the alpine plants Frank collected were not easy to grow. They came from harsh climates, cold, windy, and rocky areas high above sea level. To keep them alive in England, Frank designed the garden so certain areas received extra sunlight. Others were shaded, and some caught the cool air coming up the hill. He used scientific methods to understand how temperature, moisture, and soil would affect the plants. Every detail of the Alpine Mountain was carefully controlled. Visitors were astonished by this creation. It was the largest alpine garden in the entire country. No one had ever built anything like it before. To walk through the rocky paths was to feel transported to a completely different landscape far from southern England. The underground lake, as if above-ground wonders were not enough, Frank also wanted something extraordinary beneath the gardens. He designed an underground lake, an artificial cavern filled with water that guests could explore in small boats. The lake was reached through a tunnel that opened into a system of caves. Some parts were dimly lit. Others used reflective surfaces to create tricks of light. Some areas were decorated with glowing glass berries that shimmered in the darkness. When people rowed boats through the underground lake, the sound of water echoed against the stone walls. It was both mysterious and magical, an experience that felt more like an adventure story than a garden visit. Pathways that play tricks on the mind, Frank's love of humor and illusions appeared everywhere. One of his simplest tricks became one of his most famous. At the edge of one lake, he placed flat stepping stones spaced just far enough apart that someone walking across them looked from a distance, like they were walking directly on the water's surface. Guests who saw this from across the garden would gasp in disbelief. The effect was simple but powerful, exactly the kind of playful surprise Frank enjoyed. In other areas, he built small caves and placed statues or gnomes inside them. A guest walking by might see a strange face staring out from the darkness. Some carvings were funny, others were odd, and some looked almost alive. These surprises gave the garden a sense of exploration. You never knew what might be waiting around the corner: sculptures, inscriptions, and hidden jokes. Frank also filled the garden with carvings, inscriptions, and mottos. Some were wise or meaningful. Others were jokes or riddles. A visitor might read a serious Latin phrase on one wall and then a silly English pun on the next. Many of the inscriptions reflected Frank's personality: clever, playful, curious, and full of dry humor. He wanted guests to smile as they walked through his world. Some messages were carved into stone arches. Others were hidden along paths or placed in corners where only observant guests would spot them. This made the gardens feel interactive, almost like a treasure hunt, a living museum. By the time the gardens neared completion, Friar Park had become a place unlike any other in England. It was not just a private estate. It was a living museum designed by a man whose imagination had no boundaries. It blended nature with fantasy, history with humor, and science with art. Visitors felt as if they were walking through different worlds. One moment in medieval Europe, the next in ancient Japan, then high in the Alps, and finally deep inside mysterious caves. Everything at Friar Park came from Sir Frank Crisp's mind. His creativity shaped every path, every carving, every stone, and every flower. The gardens did not simply surround the house. They told a story that would soon be nearly forgotten, until a very unexpected person rediscovered it decades later. A gentleman of science, humor, and curiosity. By the early 1900s, Sir Frank Crisp had turned Friar Park into a personal laboratory of imagination. But his life wasn't only about gardens and quirky jokes. He was also a respected scientist, a generous supporter of scientific institutions, and a man whose personality blended seriousness with fun in a way very few people could match. To many people in London society, Frank seemed like a man of contradictions. He was a top lawyer who handled some of the most complicated international contracts of the Victorian era. Yet, he preferred spending time in a garden, studying tiny plants. He was a scientific thinker who entered competitions for the best microscope techniques. Yet, he covered his estate with playful statues of friars holding frying pans. He was wealthy enough to build a mansion with turrets and stained glass windows, yet he laughed at simple jokes carved into stone. To understand how all of these pieces fit together, we need to look at the parts of Frank's life that shaped his mind long before Friar Park was created. His career in science and societies. Even though Frank's main career was in law, he had a deep love for science, especially botany and microscopy. His interest in plants was clear from the design of Friar Park, but his relationship with scientific communities went far beyond casual gardening. He became a member of the Linnean Society, one of the oldest scientific organizations in the world. This group was famous for its work on evolution, plant studies, and natural history. Being part of this society was not easy. Membership was only given to people who had proven knowledge, contributed to scientific work, or supported important scientific projects. Frank did all three. He didn't just attend meetings, he became treasurer, a position that required careful financial management, trust, and respect. Eventually, he became vice president, showing that the society valued his leadership and contributions. He also donated scientific instruments, books, and money to support their work. But his scientific involvement didn't end there. Frank also joined the Royal Microscopical Society, a group focused on the use of microscopes to study the natural world. He spent hours experimenting, practicing, and improving his techniques. His dedication was so strong that he won prizes for excellence in microscopic photography and published detailed reports on what he discovered. These studies weren't simple hobbies. They were real scientific work. Frank's scientific mind influenced everything he built at Friar Park. He didn't design gardens randomly, he studied them. He researched medieval gardening methods, Japanese landscaping rules, and alpine ecosystems. Every decision had a purpose, and every plant was chosen with care. A man who loved jokes as much as knowledge. Although Frank was respected in scholarly circles, he never let his life become too serious. Humor was just as important to him as science. His jokes weren't loud, silly, or wild. Instead, they were clever, subtle, and the type that made people stop for a moment and think. This love of humor shaped Friar Park in a way that made it stand out from other Victorian estates. Most wealthy homes of the time tried to impress guests with strict beauty and rich decoration. Friar Park did that too, but it also made people smile. A guest walking through the grounds might suddenly notice a statue peeking out from behind a rock, or a carved friar grinning from a corner. They might read a strange inscription and wonder if it was wise or if it was simply teasing them. One of the most famous jokes was the "Don't keep off the grass" sign placed near the gates. People would stop and read it again, trying to figure out what it meant. This kind of humor was very much like Frank himself, gentle, confusing in a fun way, and clever enough to spark conversation. Inside the mansion, his humor continued. Light switches shaped like friars' noses required guests to poke them to turn on the lamps. Some rooms had carvings of faces watching from ceiling beams. Even the fireplaces had joking inscriptions. Everywhere you looked, a small surprise waited. These playful touches made Friar Park feel alive. Unlike many grand estates where guests felt they needed to behave in a certain stiff, formal way, Frank's estate encouraged curiosity and laughter. A generous and respected neighbor. Although Frank was wealthy and lived in a grand mansion, he was known as a friendly and generous neighbor in Henley-on-Thames. He did not hide behind the walls of his estate or pretend he was better than everyone around him. Instead, he supported local events, donated to community projects, and welcomed people to explore his gardens. He became famous for hosting the staff of the Linnean Society at annual summer parties. They would walk through the gardens, ride boats through the underground lake, and enjoy outdoor meals while discussing plants, science, and discoveries. These gatherings made Friar Park both a social center and a place of learning. Frank also entertained his legal colleagues, scientists, writers, and friends from London. When guests visited, he personally guided them around the estate, telling stories about the plants, explaining his jokes, or pointing out tiny details they might otherwise miss. Everyone who visited remembered how much he enjoyed showing them the wonders he had created. His excitement was contagious. His children grew up surrounded by creativity, science, and playful surprises. They ran through the gardens, explored the caves, and learned about plants from their father. Friar Park was not only a project for Frank, it was also a family home filled with memories and joy. The peak of Friar Park's glory. By the early 1900s, Friar Park had reached its peak. The mansion was complete. The alpine gardens were thriving. The Japanese garden was perfectly balanced. The medieval areas were detailed and accurate. The underground lake shimmered with mysterious reflections. Guests wandered through stone passageways, grassy meadows, rocky cliffs, and hidden corners full of surprises. People called it one of the most curious and impressive estates in England. Gardeners, architects, and scientists visited just to observe Frank's creations. Some saw it as a work of art. Others saw it as a museum of gardening history. And many saw it simply as a magical place. But none of this would last forever. As Frank grew older, he continued to improve the estate, but the world outside was changing. The Victorian era was ending. The First World War would soon reshape England. New generations had different tastes, and maintaining such a complex estate required enormous effort and money. Still, Frank remained dedicated to his dream right until the end of an era. In 1919, Sir Frank Crisp passed away at the age of 75. His death marked the end of the era in which Friar Park was at its most alive. Without him, the estate lost its guiding force. No one else had his combination of imagination, knowledge, humor, and obsession. No one else understood each garden the way he did, and no one else could maintain the estate with the same passion. After his death, the decline began slowly at first, but over time, the gardens that once amazed everyone began to fade. However, the story of Friar Park was far from over. Someone unexpected, a young musician from one of the most famous bands in the world, would one day discover Frank's forgotten masterpiece and bring it back to life. But before that moment, the estate had to face years of neglect and near ruin, decline, rediscovery, and the legacy that refused to die. After Sir Frank Crisp passed away in 1919, Friar Park entered a long and difficult chapter. His children inherited the estate, but none of them had the same intensity or passion that Frank poured into every part of the gardens. They admired it, of course. They had grown up running through the caves, exploring the stepping stones, and listening to their father's explanations of tiny plants. But admiration was not enough to keep the estate alive. Friar Park was not like ordinary gardens. It was built with such complexity that it needed constant attention. The alpine plants had to be maintained carefully, or they would die. The caves needed repairs. The Japanese garden had water systems that required regular cleaning. Even the humor of the estate demanded work. Many of the statues, carvings, and inscriptions were made of materials that didn't survive well without maintenance. Soon after the First World War, England was changing. Large estates were becoming too expensive to manage. Many families sold their homes, tore them down, or turned them into schools and institutions. Friar Park sadly fell into that same pattern, a slow fading of the wonderland. By the 1930s, parts of the garden were already in decline. The alpine plants began to disappear as weeds and ivy tangled around the stone paths. The underground lake, once a thrilling adventure, became harder to access and was eventually closed. The Japanese garden lost its precise shapes as trees grew wild and blocked the sunlight. Even the once vibrant pathways became overgrown. The estate changed owners multiple times, and with each new owner, the gardens slipped further from their original beauty. Some didn't have the money to maintain it. Others didn't understand what they had. Without someone as imaginative and dedicated as Sir Frank Crisp, Friar Park simply became too much to handle. At one point, the mansion was used as a convent school. Nuns and students lived inside the house, using the large rooms as classrooms and dormitories. But while the house was still standing, the grounds remained far too complicated for a school to manage. The magical world Frank created became hidden beneath years of neglect. For decades, it seemed as though Friar Park would join the long list of British estates lost forever. But then, something entirely unexpected happened. A beetle enters the story. In January 1970, a young man who had just gone through one of the biggest musical breakups in history heard that a curious old estate was for sale. His name was George Harrison, the quiet, thoughtful, spiritually minded former guitarist of the Beatles. At this time, the Beatles had only recently drifted apart. The world was watching them, waiting for news, and every member of the band felt the pressure differently. George Harrison, who valued peace and privacy, wanted to step away from the chaos. He wanted a home where he could think clearly, make music, and live quietly with his family. When he first visited Friar Park, he saw something that other buyers had missed. While the estate was overgrown, tangled, and messy, George recognized the creativity and intelligence that shaped it. The carved friars, the alpine stones, the mysterious pathways, even under layers of neglect, he felt the presence of Sir Frank Crisp everywhere. Where others saw ruins, George saw possibilities. Where others saw work, George saw beauty waiting to return. So, in January 1970, he bought the entire estate for 140,000 piranhas, a price that would be impossible today, but a large amount at the time. Restoring the lost world. Once the estate became his home, George Harrison slowly began restoring it. He cleared overgrown paths, trimmed trees, repaired walls, and brought back sections of the garden that had been hidden for decades. He didn't try to change Frank's ideas. Instead, he honored them. George often said that he didn't feel like the true owner of Friar Park. Instead, he felt like a guardian taking care of someone else's genius. He respected Sir Frank Crisp's humor his scientific mind, and his originality. Inside the mansion, George built a modern recording studio, which he named F.B. Shot, Friar Park Studios, Henley-on-Thames. This studio became one of the most important creative spaces of his life. Here, George recorded his critically acclaimed triple album, All Things Must Pass, along with many other solo projects. Friends and musicians visited, and the estate became a peaceful creative retreat for artists who needed space away from public attention. The mansion and studio combined made Friar Park a living bridge between two worlds: the Victorian imagination of Sir Frank Crisp, the musical genius of George Harrison. Crisp's words become Harrison's music. One of the most beautiful connections between the two men came from an inscription Frank had carved into the estate more than 70 years earlier. On one of the stones was written a line that George later used in the song Ballad of Sir Frankie Crisp, and in his album artwork, "Ring out the old, ring in the new, ring out the false, ring in the true." George often walked through the gardens reading Frank's inscriptions, absorbing their humor, wisdom, and spirit. These words made their way into his music, shaping the reflective, peaceful tone he became known for in his solo career. It's rare that a rock musician finds inspiration from a Victorian gardening fanatic. But at Friar Park, their worlds blended perfectly, a home full of life again. With George's care, the gardens regained their enchantment. He restored what he could and preserved what remained. While not every part of Frank's original design survived, enough of it remained to keep the estate magical. George and his family lived there for decades. He spent quiet days gardening, meditating, writing songs, and walking along the same paths Frank once walked. The estate gave him the peace he needed after years of fame. It protected him from the outside world. It helped him grow as an artist and as a person. Even after George's passing in 2001, Friar Park remained a private family home. His wife, Olivia Harrison, and their son, Tawny Harrison, continue to care for it. The estate is not open to the public, which helps preserve its privacy. But the world knows that behind those tall iron gates, one of England's most unusual gardens still lives. A legacy that crosses centuries. Today, Friar Park stands as a remarkable fusion of two extraordinary lives. It tells the story of Sir Frank Crisp, the eccentric lawyer with a scientific mind and a playful heart. He imagined a world of caves, mountains, illusions, and historical gardens. And then he built it with passion and curiosity. And it tells the story of George Harrison, the musician who saw beauty in what others ignored and saved the estate from being lost forever. He brought music, energy, and new life to a place that had almost faded away. Together, these two men, born generations apart, protected each other's legacies. Frank's gardens inspired George's songs. George's love brought Frank's estate back from the edge of ruin. The final message of our Friar Park. If Frank could speak today, he might be delighted that his jokes, carvings, and ideas survived long enough to influence one of the world's greatest musicians. And if George could speak, he might say that Friar Park gave him something he rarely found elsewhere: peace, wonder, and a connection to a quieter world. Friar Park is more than a mansion. It is more than gardens. It is a reminder that imagination, no matter how unusual, can last far longer than its creator ever expected. And it proves that even across centuries, creativity calls creativity, and one dreamer can help keep another dreamer's world alive. When people hear the name Sam Walton, most think of Walmart, the enormous retail chain that stretches across the United States and far beyond. But long before Walmart became a global giant, long before millions of shoppers pushed carts through brightly lit aisles, and long before small towns across America saw blue store signs rising along their highways, Sam Walton was simply a hard-working young man from a quiet part of Oklahoma. Born in 1918 in a small town called Kingfisher, Oklahoma, Sam Walton grew up during a time when earning every dollar took real effort. His family didn't live a life of luxury. They moved around as his father searched for business opportunities to support the family. Young Sam learned early on that money didn't come easily, and that hard work, kindness, and determination could shape a person's future. These values would stay with him for the rest of his life. Even as a child, Sam was fascinated by how stores worked. He watched how people behaved when they shopped, how goods were arranged on shelves, and how a friendly smile from a store worker could make someone want to come back. By the time he reached adulthood, he already knew that he wanted to be in the retail world. He wanted to create a place where customers felt welcome, where prices were fair, and where they could find almost anything they needed. In 1945, after serving his country during World War II, Sam Walton opened his very first store, a Ben Franklin variety store, often called a five and dime. Located in Newport, Arkansas, the shop carried affordable everyday items, things families could buy without feeling guilty about spending money. This little store may have looked simple, but it was the seed of something far greater. Here, Sam studied every detail about retail, what customers liked, what annoyed them, and what made them return. He worked long hours, constantly trying to improve the store. He greeted customers personally, remembered their names, and understood their needs. As the years went by, he opened more stores, each one a bit more successful than the last. His philosophy was simple: sell things cheaply, treat customers like family, and make shopping easy for everyone. That simple approach would eventually become the foundation of Walmart, one of the most powerful and recognizable companies on earth. The success of Walmart made Sam Walton a billionaire, but Sam never felt the need to live like one. Money didn't change him. It didn't make him chase a life of fancy parties, glamorous mansions, or expensive cars. He stayed committed to the humble lifestyle he always believed in. As Walmart grew and grew, people became curious about the man behind the empire. What kind of home did he live in? Did he own a giant mansion with crystal chandeliers and gold-plated rooms? Did he surround himself with luxury like other wealthy business owners? Surprisingly, the answer was no. The home where Sam Walton spent most of his life was built in Bentonville, Arkansas, a quiet and peaceful town with tree-lined streets and friendly neighbors. Bentonville would later become famous as the headquarters of Walmart, but before that, it was simply the place where Sam and his family wanted to live. The Walton home in Bentonville wasn't the kind of place people imagine when they think of a billionaire's residence. It wasn't a huge palace with a towering gate, marble driveways, or a staff of servants. Instead, it was a simple ranch-style house, one that could easily be mistaken for any other home in the neighborhood. It had warm wooden walls, comfortable rooms, and a cozy feel that reflected the values of the family who lived there. But while the house looked modest from the outside, it was far more meaningful on the inside. This was where the Walton children, Alice, Rob, Jim, and John, grew up. This was where the family shared meals, planned the future, and enjoyed simple moments that mattered more than money. It was also a place where important business ideas were born, ideas that would shape the future of retail around the world. The Bentonville home began its history in 1958, when Sam and his wife, Helen Walton, decided it was time to build a house that was both comfortable and practical. Helen had strong opinions about design and wanted a home that felt warm and connected to nature. Together, they hired a young architect named E. Fay Jones, a rising talent who had studied under the legendary Frank Lloyd Wright, one of America's most famous architects. The Waltons purchased a quiet, forested lot on the east side of Bentonville. The natural landscape was filled with tall trees, shade, and the calm sound of a small stream that flowed through the property. Instead of clearing everything, the family wanted to build a home that blended into its surroundings. They believed in keeping nature close, not pushing it aside. To make the property even more peaceful, the architect created a gentle waterfall and a reflecting pond by carefully damming the stream. These features brought calm movement and light into the backyard, making the home feel like a private retreat far away from noise, even though it was in the middle of town. Using local stone, warm wood, and materials found in Arkansas, E. Fay Jones built a structure that felt natural and inviting. The stone floors and inlaid walls gave the home a grounded, earthy feeling. Walking inside felt like stepping into a peaceful cottage designed for comfort rather than show. Every detail was created to reflect the Walton family's humble way of life. This is where the 4 Walton children each had their own rooms, their own space, and their own routines. Each bedroom was decorated with wooden beds, custom furniture, and personal items that made them feel at home. The house was never about showing off wealth. It was about giving the children a safe and warm place to grow. Unfortunately, the original house wouldn't last forever. In the early morning hours of April 1972, a lightning strike during a storm caused a fire that spread rapidly through the home. Most of the structure was destroyed before firefighters were able to control the flames. Thankfully, Sam and Helen managed to escape safely, though the shock of losing their home was heartbreaking. But the Walton family didn't give up. Helen called E. Fay Jones again and asked him to rebuild, this time slightly larger, with better materials, and with a layout more suited for entertaining now that their children were grown. This is where the next chapter of the home begins. After the terrible fire in 1972, the Walton property looked like a scene of loss and sadness. All that remained were burned beams, damaged stone, and the memories of a home that once held laughter, family gatherings, and late-night talks. But Helen Walton was not the kind of person to stay discouraged for long. She believed that a house could be rebuilt, and even more importantly, that a home could rise stronger than before. So she contacted the architect once again, E. Fay Jones, the talented designer who had created their first home years earlier. But this time, Helen had a clearer vision. Her children were older now, living their adult lives, and she wanted the new house to reflect the next chapter of the family's story. She wanted a place where they could host friends, hold gatherings, and enjoy warm evenings inside a home full of light and comfort. Although the new home followed the general shape of the old one, it would be larger, sturdier, and built with higher quality materials. One of the biggest changes was the addition of something Sam Walton had always insisted they didn't need: central air conditioning. Sam had always been thrifty, sometimes in almost unbelievable ways. Even as his wealth grew into millions and then billions, he still didn't see a reason to pay for luxuries he considered unnecessary. But Helen gently insisted, and this time, Sam agreed. While the new home was under construction, the Waltons lived in a double-wide mobile home placed right on the property. It wasn't glamorous, but it kept them close to the rebuilding process. Sam would sometimes joke about living in a trailer, even though he was one of the richest men in America. He didn't mind. To him, a home wasn't about grand staircases or marble floors. It was about the people inside. During construction, Sam would occasionally ask his wife if they truly needed to rebuild the entire house from scratch. Each time, Helen would give the same firm reply: "Yes, Sam, we do." A warm welcome. Entering the Walton home. Once the new Bentonville house was completed, visitors stepping through the front door immediately noticed that the entrance was inviting, simple, and warm. The front door was the same style as before the fire, and just beyond it stood a set of glass panel walls that allowed natural sunlight to spill into the main living areas. The living room was the heart of the home, both in size and in feeling. Large sofas were arranged to create a comfortable gathering space where the family could talk, relax, and spend time together. The room featured stone-stacked walls, adding a sense of strength and timelessness. A wide fireplace stood proudly along one wall, its stone exterior matching the natural design of the home. What made the room feel special was the number of windows. Large wooden-framed windows stretched across the living room, letting fresh daylight pour inside. Through them, visitors could see the quiet landscape outside, tall trees, the soft flowing water of the pond, and the calm greenery that surrounded the house. The space felt like an extension of nature. It didn't try to separate the indoors from the outdoors. Instead, it welcomed the outside world in. The attention to detail made the room feel complete. You could find carefully chosen accent pieces placed on shelves, simple vases filled with flowers from the garden, and seasonal decorations that showed how much Helen cared about creating a peaceful environment. Every part of the home blended vintage charm with minimalist design, proving that less is more wasn't just a phrase. It was a lifestyle. A cozy corner, the hearth room. To the left of the living room was another warm and intimate room known as the hearth room. This space had its own fireplace and a comfortable sofa, making it perfect for quiet reading, family conversations, or late-night thinking. The ceiling had an intricate, almost geometric pattern that hinted at E. Fay Jones's architectural style, simple yet meaningful. The design reminded people of old castle hallways, with small details that made the room feel larger and more elegant. This room often served as a quiet retreat for the Waltons. Sam, especially, enjoyed sitting by the fire and reflecting. Many believed that some of his biggest ideas that shaped Walmart's future, were developed right here. The kitchen. Heart of a family. Home. The kitchen in the Walton home was more modern than most people might expect from such a humble family. While it wasn't filled with luxury items, it was designed for practicality and comfort. It featured high-quality wooden cabinets, granite countertops, stainless steel appliances, lots of counter space for preparing meals, shelves and drawers for organized storage. This kitchen wasn't built for show. It was built for use. Helen often cooked here, and the family enjoyed meals together without any sense of formality. Even after Walmart became a massive corporation, the Waltons still valued everyday moments like cooking dinner, laughing around the kitchen table, and enjoying homemade food. Along the hallway near the kitchen was a large storage room with built-in wardrobes and cabinets. With 4 children who grew up in the house, there was always a need for extra storage. From toys and clothes to holiday decorations and family keepsakes, this room helped keep the rest of the house tidy and uncluttered. Bedrooms built for comfort and family. The bedrooms in the Walton home were designed with the same simplicity and warmth found in the rest of the house. Each of the 4 children, Alice, Rob, Jim, and John, had their own room. The rooms had wooden beds, custom furniture, and large windows that brought in natural light. These bedrooms weren't decorated with rare antiques or expensive artwork. Instead, they reflected the personality of each child. Posters on the walls, books on nightstands, toys on shelves, and personal treasures tucked away in drawers made each space feel alive and loved. Visitors often commented on how normal the house felt. Nothing about it screamed wealth or extravagance. It felt like a home that belonged to any hardworking family in America, not the family behind one of the biggest retail companies in the world. The natural beauty outside the home. Beyond the walls of the house stretched a landscape that was carefully planned, yet felt natural and effortless. The outdoor spaces were designed to connect directly with the inside of the home. When you stepped out the back, you walked onto wooden staircases that led down to a wide, open yard. This yard was where the Waltons often gathered, played with their dog, and spent summer evenings together. There were shady areas under tall trees, a soft, grassy lawn, and the peaceful sound of running water from the pond and waterfall. The architect had designed the landscape to look like an extension of the Ozark Woods. The land wasn't overly groomed or shaped. Instead, it was meant to look calming, familiar, and deeply connected to Arkansas's natural beauty. It was a space where family memories were made. Birthdays, outdoor meals, quiet walks, and moments of laughter echoing across the yard. This home wasn't about displaying wealth. It was about the comfort of ordinary life, the beauty of simplicity, and the values that defined Sam Walton. The Walton home in Bentonville didn't just serve as a place to sleep or eat meals. It became a living example of how Sam Walton believed life should be lived. Even as Walmart grew into a massive company and Sam became one of the richest men in America, he never felt drawn to expensive lifestyles. The home reflected that same philosophy, one built on simplicity, humility, and the belief that true comfort doesn't come from luxury, but from family and meaningful moments. People who knew Sam often said he could have afforded the largest mansion in Arkansas, or even several mansions across the country. Yet he stayed right here, in a quiet ranch-style house surrounded by trees, neighbors, and the small-town charm that felt familiar and honest. The Bentonville home wasn't built to impress visitors. It was created to support a peaceful, happy life. Inside the house, every space had a purpose. Nothing was added simply to show off money. Instead, each room reflected how the family lived their everyday lives. The living areas were filled with comfortable couches instead of fancy furniture. The wooden accents throughout the home felt warm and welcoming. Even the art on the walls tended to be simple pieces that Helen loved, small paintings, nature sketches, or family photos. A house of gathering and warmth. While the Walton home looked ordinary from the outside, it hosted many moments that were far from ordinary. Family reunions, neighborhood dinners, business conversations, and late-night talks happened within those walls. It became a place where ideas were shared, where the Walton children learned about responsibility, and where the family bonded over the values their parents taught them. Sam often preferred meeting people in comfortable, relaxed settings. There were many times when he invited business partners, Walmart associates, or close friends to visit the house instead of meeting in a formal office or a luxury restaurant. He believed that people talked more openly when they weren't surrounded by flashy displays of wealth. The house felt like a safe space for honest conversations, whether the topic was business, family, or future plans. The fireplace in the main living room became an important part of the Walton lifestyle. It wasn't just a source of warmth. It was a symbol of the calm environment Sam loved. He could sit near the fire for hours, reflecting on Walmart's operations, thinking about his employees, or planning how to improve the shopping experience for everyday customers. Many people believe that some of Walmart's smartest ideas were first imagined in that quiet room. The dining area, a place for connection, connected. To the living space was a dining area where the family gathered each day. It was simple: wooden chairs, a long dining table, and warm lighting from above. Yet meals here carried meaning. The Waltons used dinner time as a moment to talk about their day, share stories, and keep their close family bond strong. Even when Walmart became a giant company, Sam continued the tradition of having dinner with his family. He preferred being home rather than attending fancy events. The dining room served as a reminder that no matter how successful someone becomes, family always comes first. Helen made sure the space felt cozy. She added table centerpieces, seasonal decorations, and small touches that changed throughout the year. During holidays, the dining room took on a magical feeling, with candles, holiday dishes, and the smell of homemade food filling the home. A home filled with practicality. One of the most interesting things about the Walton house was how practical and functional it was. Both Sam and Helen believed in using space wisely. They didn't clutter rooms with expensive art or oversized furniture. Instead, they chose items that made sense for their lifestyle. For example, most furniture was made from wood because it lasted longer. Shelves held family books, photo albums, and simple decorations. Cabinets were used to store extra household items instead of leaving things lying around. The kitchen had every tool needed for cooking, but no unnecessary gadgets. The house didn't feel empty or cold. Instead, it felt organized and calm. Visitors often said they felt instantly comfortable when they walked inside because the home didn't feel like a showroom. It felt lived in and loved. The bedrooms, personal spaces, full of memories. Each of the Walton children's bedrooms reflected their personalities. Alice Walton, who would later become an influential businesswoman and art collector, had books and artwork that showed her interests. Rob, Jim, and John Walton each filled their rooms with things they loved, from sports items to school awards, personal collections, and childhood keepsakes. The bedrooms were not made to impress guests. They were created to support growth, creativity, and comfort. The beds were simple, the decorations were personal, and the windows allowed sunlight to brighten the rooms each morning. This environment helped shape children who would later become leaders in business, philanthropy, and community work. Even after the children grew up and moved away, the rooms still held pieces of their childhood. Helen kept certain belongings, drawings, awards, gifts, and books, as reminders of the years spent raising her family inside this warm home. A space for work and private thought. Another important area in the Walton house was Sam's workspace. Although he had offices across Arkansas and later in Bentonville, he preferred having a small home office for reading reports, writing ideas, and studying customer trends. This room had a wooden desk, simple bookshelves, papers and reports neatly organized, a comfortable chair, a window overlooking the yard. It didn't look like the office of a billionaire. There were no gold nameplates, no expensive art pieces, and no giant leather chairs. Instead, it looked like the workspace of a hardworking man who loved learning and improving. Sam often said that success wasn't about having the most money. It was about working the hardest to help others live better. A family that lived modestly. Despite great wealth, many people find it surprising that the Walton family continued living so modestly, even when they had enough money to purchase mansions, yachts, private planes, or expensive properties around the world. Instead, they chose a lifestyle centered on simplicity. It wasn't just Sam who believed in humility. Helen Walton, too, lived with the same philosophy. She supported community projects, loved education, and cared deeply about helping others. Instead of spending money on things she didn't need, she invested in people, donated to charities, and worked to improve life in Bentonville. The house reflected this mindset. It wasn't a showcase of wealth, it was a reflection of purpose. The yard and outdoor spaces, a natural treasure. Outside the house, the yard stretched out like a peaceful green carpet. The tall trees provided shade during hot Arkansas summers. The sound of the small waterfall added a soothing backdrop to the family's daily life. Birds often gathered in the trees, creating a natural soundtrack that made the property feel like a retreat. The yard wasn't manicured like the gardens of a palace. Instead, the natural Ozark environment was preserved. The architect wanted the land to feel like a forest clearing, gentle, earthy, and peaceful. This is where the Waltons held family gatherings, played with their pets, and enjoyed time away from the pressures of running a major company. It was also where the children learned responsibility by helping with small outdoor chores, gardening tasks, or simply spending time outside, exploring nature. A home that encouraged balance. The Bentonville house helped the Waltons maintain a healthy balance between work and family. Even though Sam worked long hours and traveled often, he tried to be home whenever possible. The house gave him a place to unwind, breathe, and remember what mattered most. This balance helped shape Walmart's identity. Sam didn't build a company based on greed or luxury. He built it based on values, fairness, hard work, and care for others. And those values began inside this home. While the Walton home served as the heart of family life, its influence extended far beyond the walls of the house. The modest ranch-style home in Bentonville was more than a private residence. It became a quiet headquarters for ideas, decisions, and values that would eventually shape not only one of the world's biggest companies, but also the entire Northwest Arkansas region. To understand the full impact of the Walton home, you have to look at Bentonville, a small, peaceful town that transformed into a major cultural and business hub because of the choices Sam Walton and his family made. A simple town that became a global destination. When Sam first moved to Bentonville, it wasn't the kind of place people traveled across the country to visit. It was a quiet community surrounded by forests, hills, and farmland. The streets weren't crowded, the buildings were small, and the people lived simple lives. Sam liked that. He didn't want to live in a big city filled with noise and distractions. He wanted a place where he could focus on his work, raise his children, and stay connected to the community around him. Bentonville was exactly that kind of place. Because Walmart grew so quickly, Bentonville eventually became known around the world, but its roots, humble, quiet, and close to nature, matched the values of the Walton family. The Walton home became a symbol of those values, a house that encouraged local connection. Instead of choosing to live somewhere exclusive or far away, Sam and Helen decided to stay close to the people who made Walmart possible, their employees, neighbors, and community members. Bentonville was filled with the everyday customers Sam cared most about. He wanted to understand their needs, see how they lived, and stay connected to the people Walmart served. Living in a modest home helped Sam stay grounded. It reminded him of his customers, who worked hard and looked for affordable prices. By living like them, he understood them. By understanding them, he built a business that served them better than any other store. The birth of Walmart history. Walton's 5 and 10. When people visit Bentonville today, one of the most important places they stop at is Walton's 5 and 10, the original store that started it all. Located in the downtown square, this little building now serves as a Walmart museum, a place filled with history, old photographs, artifacts, and stories about the man who changed American retail forever. Visitors can walk through the museum and see the early store layout, Sam's old office, personal notes and letters, facts about Walmart's growth, displays about the Walton family. The museum feels nostalgic because it honors the simplicity of the early days. It stands as a reminder that Walmart began not with large stores or massive warehouses, but with one small shop and one determined man. Whenever Sam left his house to visit the store or check on employees, he often walked the same streets his neighbors used every day. He talked to people directly, asked for feedback, and listened carefully. This simple, genuine interest in people shaped Walmart's values for generations. A corporate giant, and with small-town roots. Even as Walmart expanded into other states and countries, Bentonville remained the family's home. The city eventually became the location of Walmart's main headquarters, not because of luxury or convenience, but because it was the place that reflected Sam's heart. Drive through Bentonville today, and you'll see Walmart stores, Walmart warehouses, Walmart supply centers, offices scattered across the area, but you'll also see the natural beauty that originally attracted the Walton family. The Ozark forests that surrounded the Walton home still protect the land, creating a calm environment even in a rapidly growing town. Crystal. Bridges. Helen Walton's influence. One of the most remarkable contributions the Walton family made to the community came decades after Sam opened his first variety store. Across from the downtown area sits Crystal Bridges Museum of American Art, a stunning architectural masterpiece funded by the Walton family, especially through Alice Walton, Sam's daughter. The museum is nestled inside a forested valley and surrounded by water elements that blend beautifully with the natural landscape. It houses priceless American artwork, sculptures, and historic pieces, all accessible to the public. The museum grounds include more than 120 acres of natural trails, wooden bridges, outdoor sculptures, peaceful ponds, quiet walking paths through the Ozarks. This museum did not appear by accident. It grew out of the Walton family's commitment to culture, education, and public enrichment, values that were nurtured inside the simple house in Bentonville. A family that built quietly but powerfully. The Waltons never tried to show off their wealth, even though they eventually became one of the richest families in the world. Bentonville locals often commented that the family preferred modest lifestyles. They didn't buy flashy homes or extravagant cars. They didn't seek attention or live behind enormous gates. Even after they became one of the wealthiest families on earth, many locals remember seeing members of the Walton family doing ordinary things, shopping at Walmart like regular customers, attending local school events, going for walks around town, quietly supporting charities, meeting friends in simple restaurants. The Walton home taught the family that wealth should not distance you from your community. Instead, it should be used to help the place you live grow stronger. Bentonville's transformation from quiet town to economic hub. Sam Walton didn't just build a company, he helped build an entire region. Because Bentonville became the headquarters of Walmart, thousands of jobs were created in the area. Over time, suppliers, vendors, and partner companies also moved their offices to Northwest Arkansas. Towns like Rogers, Springdale, and Fayetteville transformed as well, bringing more opportunities, more people, and more development. But even as Bentonville changed, the Walton home remained a reminder of where everything started. While large office buildings and modern structures rose across the region, the Walton house stood quietly among the trees, unchanged in spirit. A model of modest wealth. As the family grew wealthier, many wondered how they kept their wealth from fading across generations, something many rich families struggle with. The answer was found inside the lessons of the Walton home. The family lived simply, avoided overspending, and focused on building businesses and supporting the community rather than chasing luxury. The Walton home reminded every generation that success is not about living richly. It is about living with purpose. The house today. A window into Sam Walton's life. Today, the Walton house in Bentonville offers an intimate look at the life of one of America's most influential entrepreneurs. It stands as a symbol of how greatness often begins in ordinary places. Visitors who see the home are surprised by how modest it looks. They expect a billionaire to live in a mansion with grand staircases and lavish decorations. Instead, they see warm wooden floors, stone walls, simple rooms filled with family memories, cozy fireplaces, an inviting kitchen, peaceful outdoor spaces. The house teaches people that Sam Walton didn't build his empire from a throne. He built it from a home filled with love, work ethic, and humble beginnings. The Bentonville home of Sam Walton may look modest at first glance, but its meaning runs deep. For many people, this house symbolizes something far more powerful than the physical structure itself. It represents the life of a man who changed the world of retail, a family that shaped an entire region, and a set of values that continue to influence millions of people today. To truly understand the home's significance, it helps to step back and look at the bigger picture, how Sam lived, what he believed in, and the legacy he left behind. The house that quietly shaped a billion-dollar philosophy. Sam Walton was not a man who cared about luxury. Even when he became incredibly wealthy, he continued to live like the same hardworking man from his early days. His lifestyle choices showed the world that success did not have to be measured by fancy houses or expensive things. In fact, Sam often joked about how simple his home was. He felt proud of it. He believed that great ideas didn't need marble staircases or golden ceilings to grow. They could grow just as beautifully in a small, cozy room with wooden floors and a stone fireplace. Inside the Walton home, the atmosphere wasn't built around showing wealth. It was built around comfort, honesty, and inspiration. The house allowed Sam to stay focused on what truly mattered: customers, employees, and the belief that everyone deserved access to affordable goods. The home helped shape the basic philosophy that made Walmart successful. The idea that a business should care more about helping people than impressing them. A family that stayed grounded through achievements. Even though the Walton family became one of the wealthiest families on earth, they stayed grounded because their home taught them humility. The home reminded each generation that the family's power didn't come from wealth. It came from the values passed down by Sam and Helen. Inside the house, the children learned responsibility by helping with chores. Helen taught kindness and generosity. Sam taught discipline and honesty. Family dinners strengthened their bond. Conversations shaped their future roles in business and community work. These lessons carried on even after the children became adults. Alice Walton became a major figure in the arts, eventually helping establish Crystal Bridges. Rob Walton took an important role in Walmart leadership. Jim Walton focused on finance and community development. John Walton, until his passing in 2005, dedicated much of his life to education and philanthropy. Each of them grew up in the same simple rooms, walked the same hallways, and learned similar lessons under the same roof. And that roof wasn't an extravagant one. It was one filled with everyday life, laughter, challenges, and growth. A house full of moments, not material things. When you walk room to room through the Walton home, or imagine it through photos, what stands out the most is not the furniture or the decorations. What stands out is the life that happened there. In the living room, the family spent countless evenings talking by the fire. Sam sometimes sat there thinking about new store layouts, customer needs, or employee experiences. In the kitchen, Helen cooked meals that brought everyone together. The sound of plates, the smell of warm food, and the rhythm of family chatter filled the air. In the bedrooms, the children grew from small kids to young adults. They learned to read, to dream, to make mistakes, and to discover their own interests. In the yard, the family played with their dog, held outdoor gatherings, and enjoyed the Arkansas sunsets. The peaceful sound of the waterfall and the calm of the pond created an environment where anyone could relax. These moments, not expensive chandeliers or marble floors, were the things that made the house truly valuable. Sam Walton's quiet generosity. People often think of billionaires as individuals who distance themselves from ordinary life. But Sam Walton was different. He was known for his generosity and his interest in improving life for others, not through fame, but through quiet actions. In Bentonville and the surrounding region, the Waltons supported education, healthcare, local charities, community projects, economic development. Sam never believed in showing off his donations. He simply believed in giving back. The same modesty seen in his home was also reflected in his philanthropic efforts. Even after his passing in 1992, his children continued supporting community growth. Schools improved, parks were built, museums were created, and local businesses thrived, all shaped by the values that began inside the Walton home, a house that influenced an entire industry. Although the Bentonville house looks like an ordinary ranch home, the ideas formed within its walls were anything but ordinary. Walmart's early strategies, affordability, customer care, and employee respect, were shaped by conversations Sam had at home. He believed in listening to customers, valuing workers, lowering prices to help families save, reducing unnecessary costs, keeping stores simple and efficient. These ideas didn't come from corporate meetings or luxury retreats. They came from a man who lived in a modest house, ate at a simple dining table, and wanted to make life easier for ordinary people. This is one of the most powerful lessons the Walton home teaches. You don't need a mansion to create big ideas. Greatness can begin anywhere. A place. Visitors. Admire for its honesty. People who visit Bentonville today are often surprised that the Walton home isn't a giant estate hidden behind gates. Instead, it sits on a quiet street lined with trees, blending into the neighborhood like any other house. Tourists who come expecting grandeur are often struck by how normal it looks, and that's exactly the point. The house stands almost like a reminder that success doesn't need to be loud, that humility is stronger than showing off, that comfort matters more than luxury, that a simple life can still create extraordinary things. The more people learn about the home, the more they understand how different Sam Walton was from many wealthy figures. His story wasn't about chasing status. It was about staying true to his childhood values. The symbol of a humble beginning. Today, Sam Walton is remembered as one of the most influential entrepreneurs of the 20th century. His ideas changed how people shop, how stores operate, and how companies treat customers. But the Bentonville home reminds everyone that his success came from humble beginnings, not from opulence. As Walmart grew into a corporation worth hundreds of billions of dollars, Sam continued living in a home that looked like it belonged to any typical American family. He chose calm over luxury, real life over showiness, and simplicity over extravagance. And that choice helped define his legacy. A final reflection. What the Walton home really represents. The Bentonville home represents many things: family, hard work, humility, vision, community, purpose. It shows that even the world's largest companies can grow from the smallest places. It shows that success can happen without abandoning your values. It shows that true power comes from staying grounded, even when life gives you every chance to rise above others. Those who visit the Walton home today walk away inspired, not because the house is fancy, but because it isn't. The modest design, the natural surroundings, and the simple rooms all tell a powerful story. Great dreams can grow anywhere, even in a quiet home on a quiet street. The Walton home reminds us that success is not measured by how large a house is or how expensive it looks. Success is measured by the impact a person leaves behind, on their family, their community, and the world. Sam Walton left behind one of the most powerful legacies in American business history. But his greatest legacy may be the one his Bentonville home still whispers today. Live simply, work hard, stay humble, help others. These values shaped Walmart, shaped a family, and shaped an entire region. And they all began inside one warm, modest, unforgettable home.